Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Cosmo Jarvis and Dunkirk's Barry Keoghan live in the shadow of violence in Calm with Horses. Former boxer Douglas Armstrong, played by Cosmo Jarvis, has become the enforcer for the Devers family, led by Ned Dennehy's Pordy and David Wilmot's Hector, that rule over a small rural Irish town. Arm tries to provide for his autistic son Jack, played by Keoghan Maroney, and his ex Ursula, played by Niamh Algar, trying to get the money to help send Jack to a specialist school, but she disapproves of Arm hanging around with Dampener Divas, played by Barry Keoghan, who hopes to take over the family business one day. When Arm and Dampener is asked by Hector to kill Flanagan, played by Liam Carney, Arm struggles with a moral dilemma. Calm with Horses, based off of the short story of the same name by Colin Barrett that was included in his anthology collection Young Skins, and is the directorial debut of Nick Rowland, who up until this point has only worked on television, including the Amazon series Ripper Street. Calm with Horses was heavily impacted by COVID-19. It was one of the last movies to play in UK cinemas on that final weekend of March 13th, before they were shut down just 4 days later. Luckily for the makers of this very small indie film, they were able to quickly pivot onto streaming services, and the film has purportedly enjoyed quite a bit of success on VOD, thanks to the fact they haven't had very much competition, and they've got the cachet of being a theatrical release. In the US, the film has been retitled The Shadow of Violence by Saban Films, a title that I'm not very happy with, both because it's quite generic, and also it gives the implication that it's an action film, which it really isn't. But you can understand the mindset here. If you just saw the title Calm with Horses, you wouldn't really know anything about the movie. There is a reason why it's called that, but just at a glance, especially on VOD services where most people in America are going to see this film, they're just going to think it's some generic horse riding movie, the kind that dozens are made every single year but are virtually identical to each other, and just simply dismissed. The Shadow of Violence at least gives a sense of the tone of the movie, if not necessarily its spirit. It is really a shame though, because Calm with Horses has deserved better treatment than it's really got. The main reason why Calm with Horses works as well as it does is that it boasts a phenomenal performance by Cosmo Jarvis in the leading role. Jarvis may not be a household name, but he certainly deserves to be after this performance, because this is one of the best performances I've seen all year. Up until now, Jarvis has probably been best known for co-starring alongside Florence Pugh in her breakout movie Lady Macbeth back in 2016. He's had some bit parts since then, but he's been given the leading role here, and he seizes it with both hands. His character of Arm, right from the outset, you know that he is someone that has been pigeonholed by his capacity for violence, both by others and by himself to a certain extent. He seems almost resigned to that fact, and you can see that right from the opening of the movie, where he administers a brutal assault on someone with almost a perfunctory sense of professionalism. He's got this huge hulking frame and the shaven head, but his narration lets you know that there is something much softer under the surface, and that's what makes Arm such an incredibly compelling character, and why Jarvis's performance, I think, carries so much of this film, is that while he can sell someone that is intense and potentially volatile, there is something about him that has a real humanity as well, and Jarvis's face is very expressive, and what really works about the movie is that you can see how much conflict registers on his face, that uncomfortability with his circumstances. And Rowland very smartly takes advantage of this in his direction by often placing the camera directly on Jarvis's face so it can really soak up his anguish and his expressions, that makes us care and empathise about him, even if he works with some truly despicable people. You get the sense that Arm is in this predicament because of his own self-loathing, that he believes that he can do nothing better than beat people up. But we as audience members watching him know that he has the capacity to be something better if he wanted to be, but he surrounded himself with people that make him his worst possible version and only pull him further and further into their dark world. And so when they ask him to kill someone, you really genuinely get the sense that he is torn, because even in this world where he's resigned himself to his job, even as he tries to numb himself with drink and drugs, he knows that that's a line that he cannot cross, because once he does, he won't be the same again. And it's so clearly expressed in Jarvis's performance. He so embodies the character at all times, right down to his accent. His Irish accent is completely impeccable. But we also care about him because we see him in the scenes he shares with his son Jack. And in those moments, you understand that he is trying to be a good father. He just doesn't know how. There are moments where he breaks through with Jack, especially when he acts very childish, because there's already something quite childlike about Arm, but for the most part, he struggles to connect with his own son, and especially struggles to really handle his behaviour. Whenever Jack has a moment that he's clearly stressed out, Arm doesn't know what to do. He just freezes, because most of his problem solving is done with violence. He's not really a part of his son's life. He's very distant from him. He's separated from his ex Ursula, and it's clear that they are going down a different path than he is, because they are intent on moving out of this small Irish town. They're moving to Cork because that is where the new school is, and so she has potentially a brighter future, and Ursula is intentionally trying to keep him apart because of the world that he inhabits. There is definitely a sense that he brings a sense of danger to them just by his sheer presence. The first time that they have a scene in the movie, it's because Arm is dragging a TV that he's stolen, and he wants to give it as a gift to his son, but Ursula doesn't want it because she knows it's too intense for Jack, and also knows where it came from. The camera, as it frequently does, lingers on Arm's bloodied knuckles. She knows that's a product of violence. And there's something quite poignant about the scenes where Arm tries to connect with his ex and his son, all the while knowing that he's being replaced. Ursula's got a new boyfriend, an outsider to the town that works at the stables. This is because Jack likes to ride on horses, hence the original title. And there's a really beautiful moment where Arm actually gets to ride on the back of a horse, and it's meditative. It's a real calming moment in an overall tense film that is a necessary relief. And it's a really nice moment that he gets to share with his son that gives you the sense that he is still making some kind of connection there. I think that Niamh Algar as Ursula also delivers a very strong performance. She essentially serves as Arm's conscience. She obviously still loves him to a certain extent and knows what he is actually capable of, and tries to spur him on to be something better, to actually take responsibility for his son as best as he can. And on the flip side of that is Barry Keoghan's Dimphna, who is essentially the devil on Arm's shoulder as they hang out with each other exclusively. Dimphna is one of the younger members of the Devers family. He feels like he has something to prove because he's being groomed to take it over one day, to take his late father's place, and as such, he's this volatile upstart. There is something very unpredictable about him. He's frequently kind of posturing, and early on in the movie, he just starts a bar fight because he thinks people are laughing at him, and he knows that he can get away with it, both because he has the protection of Arm, but also that of his family and its reputation, and how feared it is in this town. And there are moments where Dimphna is deeply unpleasant, especially when he's around Ursula, because he knows that she is trying to put her influence over him, and he resents that, and he really hates her and talks about her in quite scathing, misogynistic language. But there's also moments where we see a different side to Dimphna. I think that there is actually a genuine friendship between Arm and him, and you really do get the sense that underneath this layer of trying to prove how tough he is, that actually he's just as conflicted as Arm is to a certain extent. When they both get the order they have to kill someone, it's clear that Dimphna doesn't want to be that kind of person either. and yet he is really pressured to be part of that environment. And so you get that sense that there is this tension between these two characters that are meant to be friends, and this sense of loyalty between them starting to fray somewhat at the edges. And Keoghan gives another great performance here. Like Jarvis, I think he's someone that people are really starting to notice, and I think that he gives a lot of nuance to this role that almost elevates it to the point that you wish he had a bit more screen time, especially towards the end of the movie. The final scene between him and Niamh, it's lacking something in terms of resolution, especially in terms of what has brought us here to that moment. It's a bit of a small pity that character doesn't quite get the send-off that I think that you really should do, especially considering that their relationship is one of the major parts of the movie. Admittedly, Calm with Horses' story is quite familiar. There are plenty of films about criminals having a sudden attack of conscience, and certainly some of the plot turns didn't really surprise me, but I think the way that it's executed, and especially the locale, makes it feel different this time out. This is especially true of the setting. The small Irish town, it feels like a dead end in a lot of ways. This is especially true of the interiors, which are decorated with an intentionally dated look. They look like they haven't been updated since the 70s and 80s. And so you get the sense that this is somewhere that has been left behind by the rest of the world. This has been reinforced by the fact that Niamh and Dymphna like to hang out in an abandoned bus. It's all very brutalist. You get the sense that this town is kind of rotting because of the corruption of the Devers family. And also, it feels extremely isolated. There's a car chase fairly late into the movie, which is really, really tense. But it feels very different to what you normally see, because a lot of crime films take place in cities, whereas here, Niamh is fleeing, but he's doing so in a car in the middle of the countryside, and it makes it feel really, really closed off from the rest of the world, which only makes it feel even scarier that this world is within its own bubble. And it's also another great example of that camera work focusing on Jarvis's face, because a lot of that car chase is just holding on a long continuous shot of Niamh driving away and how panic-stricken his face is in that moment. But one of the other reasons why the movie is so brilliantly effective is that it establishes this atmosphere of violence right from the outset. We see Niamh go to work, but it's not done in a sensationalized way. If anything, the camera holds back quite a distance, but that in no way diminishes its impact. It feels realistic and upsetting and genuinely painful. And from that point forward, that sets the tone. There isn't actually that much on-screen violence in Calm with Horses, and when it does arrive, it's usually fairly fleeting, but very strong. And it feels that way because we're so tense through much of the running time. There's always this sense that it could break out at any moment. There's this volatility and real suspense and tension, especially as the plot proceeds. The movie really makes you feel genuinely unnerved throughout it. Like, there is very little sense of safety, that these are genuinely dangerous people that you don't want to be on the wrong side of, and it just keeps escalating and escalating. And this leads in interesting directions in the third act, going towards the ending, which may well confound audience expectations. We've been primed by crime movies for literally decades that they'll build to some sort of violent reckoning, that they'll come to a head in a bloodbath. But audiences accustomed to that, or expecting some form of retaliation, they're going to find themselves met with an anti-climax. It's an intentional one on that level, because Calm with Horses isn't interested in violence for its own sake. It's interested in violence in the way that it reflects upon its characters. It's those that it really cares about. And that really reflects in the film's actual climax, which is much more of an emotional one. And because of that, it feels a lot more refreshing and subversive. And also, I've praised Cosmo Jarvis's performance extensively already, but it really does come into its own in the final scenes of this film, especially in a long phone call where the camera just holds and holds and holds. And it's so moving and so wonderfully played. It's very powerful, and it just feels like a very fitting conclusion for that character. If you've been watching this movie and really connecting with it in the way the filmmakers intended, I think that that ending will land properly. If not, it may feel a little bit like a disappointment. I do have some gripes about this ending. I do think that the tension does dissipate somewhat in this conclusion, which is a bit of a shame, even if that does ultimately make sense. But I do think the morality of the movie does start to get a little bit heavy-handed. There's essentially an innocent introduced very late into the film who essentially just tells Arm all that he needs to know about his own conscience in a way that feels very writerly. It doesn't actually feel like a person. That does feel a bit like a false note, albeit a relatively small one in the grand scheme of things. Calm with Horses is a brilliant drama. Cosmo Jarvis is sublime, but the rest of the cast is uniformly great, and you'd never guess this was a debut feature. Roland directs this with such quiet confidence. The film is very sparse and minimalistic, but it knows how to take its limited resources and use them to its fullest potential. I think that this is a really compelling film that shows that Roland has a lot of potential in the future. And while this may be a very dark, very tough movie, it also has a lot of sensitivity to it at the same time, especially in the way that it portrays autism. I think that it really cares about its characters on an emotional level. And so I think if viewers are primed in the right headspace and approach this movie in the right frame of mind, I think that they'll appreciate it a lot. If they're not, I think that a lot of its virtues will go overlooked. But I do think this movie is well worth seeking out. Calm with Horses, or The Shadow of Violence, whatever you want to call it, comes highly recommended. Calm with Horses is a soulful exploration of violence and its impacts, with an absolutely marvellous performance by Cosmo Jarvis in the lead role that he fills with soul conflict and humanity that makes him absolutely absorbing. Although the crime film plot feels familiar, the rural Irish setting makes this feel fresher than most, with a genuine sense of dilemma and consequence in a morally grey world, where the pervasive threat of brutality informs the movie's mounting tension. It is a very stripped down film, but excellently helmed by Nick Rowland, who directs with such confident precision considering it's his film debut. While those expecting a more conventional genre film focused on retribution may find themselves disappointed, the film goes for a more emotionally fulfilling conclusion that is unexpectedly poignant, finding a gentleness underneath its rough exterior. If you like this review, then you can support me over at my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.